turned out to be completely unreliable assholes.
Hello, Tim.
Hello, Ryan.
And hello, everyone else who's here, but not here, but even more here. Yes, that's you listening. Welcome to Dismembering Horror, episode 161, chugging along here of Dismembering Horror, the podcast show where myself, Ryan McDuffie, and
myself, Tim Aslin.
That's right. We dismember a horror film here at Dismembering Horror. Every week, in fact, we talk about what worked for us, what did not work for us, and anything else we found interesting or noteworthy about a, you guessed it, horror film. And we do that. Well, in addition to how I just said, we're on the hunt for things we haven't seen for a while. We're hoping to always dig up the gold. Sometimes we get silver. Sometimes we get bronze. Sometimes we get something that's not even a precious mineral. I don't know what, but it's all part of the adventure. Because what would the adventure be if it just was all gold? There wouldn't be any adventure. And today, unless there's anything else to say, actually, I did want to say something else before we jumped into today's film, Tim.
Oh, yeah?
It's just, when I'm listening back to the episodes, and I'm always, wishing I said something better or whatever. Most of the times I let it go, but this one is just like it just said it so well, the point that I was trying to get at, but was having difficulty doing in our last episode, Candyman, the new Candyman. And I was trying to get into describing how what was so creepy about it is when you have a supernatural entity that no matter how much you define it, or the more you define it, the more unknown it actually is, Yeah. And I went on a lot more to try to define what that is. But I just to point it out, he said it in the trailer so well, what I was trying to get at, what the movie did so well. It's just that line in the trailer when he says, Candyman isn't a he. Candyman's the whole damn hive. That's such a good line, because the whole damn hive, we get what that means, but it's such a non-literal thing, It's talking about what The Shining is. It's great. So there you go, Tim. The whole damn hive.
Ain't that the truth?
Such a good line, such a good film. And we have a very different sort of film for everyone today. We had a request that, I was feeling too. We should do some more of those, 30s, 40s horror classics. And we haven't done anything from, the official series of Universal, monster horror films. We have Black Cat's a Universal picture, and we did The Body Snatcher, I don't think was Universal. But anyway, we're getting two of them with this episode because we covered Frankenstein, or we're about to cover Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman from 1943. And that includes both Lon Chaney Jr., who originated the Wolfman role in, so this is the sequel to The Wolfman with Lon Chaney Jr., and is the fifth Frankenstein movie with Bela Lugosi, who's famous for playing Dracula as the Frankenstein monster, but who also previously appeared in the earlier Frankenstein movies as Igor. So,
oh, right. That's right. Yeah, I've forgotten about that.
Right.
Oh my God. But
anyway,
wasn't Lon Chaney also, didn't he play the monster at one point?
Yes, I think we'll save all that for things of note because it gets confusing.
It's confusing.
Exactly. And you're only going to be maybe even more confused. Just kind of like what I said, that line in the Candyman. The more you describe it, the more confusing it actually gets.
Yeah.
Much like that. Well, yeah, it sounds like you're good to jump into it too here, Tim. Right?
Yeah.
All right. Then let's jump right in, as I said, with our trailer. So from 1943, let's see, who even made this thing? Directed by Roy William Neal with a screenplay by Kurt Siodmak. Here we go. Frankenstein meets the Wolfman.
But he doesn't understand. There's a curse upon me. I change into a wolf.
Listen to me, Peggy. I saw my father become obsessed by his power. He died a horrible death.
There's no need for us all to storm after her. She'll come in if I ask. Why should we treat her so fancy? She's a Frankenstein.
There we have it, folks. There we have it, Tim. All right. So, per our rating system, I'd love to know what we all think. Would we tell ourselves to avoid this film, stream it, rent it, or buy it? Who do you want to go first, Tim?
You can go first, Ryan.
Tim, this is most certainly a box set buy. I've always wanted to get like my own, the Blu-ray box set of all these Universal monster films. There's a 4K box set coming out of just like the 4 main original ones. So now I'm waiting to see if they're going to release all that way. And on loan, I've had for years from our friend Peter Warden, the DVD set of it all. So that's where I watched this from. And I've been slowly working my way through it over the years. But, even as a standalone, I'd be happy to own this film. This just like totally gets at everything I love about these old Universal monster movies. I'll just start to list them in the what worked section that we have. But I can say that sheer like fun wise, and it's even just for like a couple moments, and maybe it's okay because the movie's just so short. But like I was probably the most excited I've ever been watching anything we've watched, watching our big ending where they finally fight, like, so for that alone, I got to give it some credence. And then just plus everything that we've already talked to, about with these older films holds true for that. That just it's the atmosphere, the acting, just, all that good stuff. Yeah, it's I can't think of any sort of more in summary things to say about it. Maybe you'll prompt me. So I'll just, I guess, save what else I have for our what worked section. How about you?
Interesting.
So sorry, buy it for me. Yeah.
Yeah. I took this movie differently. I was like mildly underwhelmed by it. I think that I'll try to explain later why that might be, but I was pretty medium on it. I thought there's cool stuff, but it didn't quite rise cinematically, if I can use a vague term such as that, to what I kind of was hoping for. So maybe that's my fault. I went in with higher expectations.
Funny because, it is just a word, but the cinematic appeal is what I was surprised by with this and what did work for me.
Okay.
And maybe another in summary way I can put it too, what worked. I feel like this is just at the sort of pinnacle where they've been making these movies for 10 years, but it's right before they introduce Abbott and Costello to them, and that sort of like, becomes the sort of spoofing itself thing. So I feel like they're just, this is just from an era, the 40s era of these films where they've hit a pretty solid stride. Like, sorry, I kind of interrupted you. Did you have anything else on? You didn't even get to your rating.
Well, I'm conflicted because I think, there's cool stuff in it, and it's not bad, but like, I think part of the problem for me is that I'm like, I am automatically comparing it to the older films, and I don't know, it's like undue criticism of it in comparison to those. So I'm torn. I'm really just a rent for it. It definitely does not feel like a buy to me, and because of essentially what I just said. And also, yeah, I'll talk about it later.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think like I wanted to kind of just talk about broadly like some of the Universal horror monster movies, and we can each go like kind of our relation to them and whatnot. But as you were saying, like why the originals are maybe, you know, the buy-its for you, I can definitely relate to that. As far as those, like we always say, the original's going to have some kind of more weight to it. Like they're going to have that depth. The horror is going to be that much, I don't know, more. They were capturing a kind of magic there more so, let's say. So this really is for me like this is the Godzilla versus Kong versus the just Godzilla, you know?
Right, yeah.
Which in itself is still going to be a buy it for me because, you know, it's Godzilla versus Kong. It's Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. So what it may be lacking in that kind of depth that the originals have, it just sort of makes up for it in other areas.
That's fair.
Yeah. And so like where are you at with these movies? Like, do you have a favorite monster? Do you have a favorite series? Because I feel like those are different things. Like, how do you maybe sort of rank them?
Oh, man, that's a good question. I think as a kid in particular, I was really partial to the original Wolfman. Maybe that's part of my issue too, is that I'm just like, this isn't that. But like I semi-recently rewatched The Creature from the Black Lagoon. And as cool as I think that movie is visually, I was kind of underwhelmed. The original Dracula, I think, is actually when I go back and watch it, I'm like, oh, kind of boring. The original Frankenstein, I think, still as a like standalone, is the best movie of all of them. And honestly, I'm not sure I ever saw The Mummy. Maybe, but I don't know. I don't really remember it. It's Bela Lugosi, right?
Wait, sorry. No, The Mummy's Boris Karloff.
Oh, right. Yes, that of course. That's actually who I meant. And yeah, I know I've seen Bride of Frankenstein, and I know a lot of people think that that's the superior movie. I can get behind that argument. I'm still partial to the original. I think the original just sort of, there's something about it. And I think, I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like they're right on the verge of jumping the shark for me with this one, where it almost feels, I hate to say it, but it almost feels slapped together. Now, I don't think the performances indicate that, but all in all, I don't know. It was a weird one. So I'll be a Rent. I'll say Rent. It's worth watching, but I'm having weird like personal feelings about it.
Well, great. That's where you are at the Rent. I was just asking about your relationship to all the other films.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll say Rent it for you. I feel like my favorite. Something really clicked with me about the Invisible Man series. Like I think that was like
Invisible Man. God,
I feel like those were the strongest movies overall in the way. But again, it's sort of like I don't have a clear it sort of depends on what aspect we're talking about. Because like you, I think all the originals are maybe like the eeriest or really have something going for them. But then, like you said, Dracula, it can be a little slow, or the total, like the lack of music can get to you kind of thing has been my experience with it. But like The Mummy, I remember liking the second and third one way better than the first one. And as monsters, like werewolves I was huge on as a kid, but I never liked the more flat-faced Wolfman design. But like I love the atmosphere and the Wolfman original and everything that sort of surrounds the Wolfman movie. The Frankenstein was never like, I love probably like Dracula is my favorite monster-wise, just as far as Dracula in himself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. I like the Frankenstein movie more. So it's just kind of like I'm all over the place. But I love them all for whatever they are.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a part of me that thinks that, like, maybe this is totally untrue, but there's a part of me that feels like the best way to get into these is as a collection. Like, grabbing individual films so far in my experience and just sort of cherry picking, I end up walking away kind of like underwhelmed. I'm kind of like, oh, that wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be or remembered it as or whatever. But I feel like if you put them in a collection and you kind of do like some sort of marathon, it just feels like it's going to be better to me.
That's exactly what I'm doing, and I've been loving it. Like going in chronological order, because then you're sort of, I don't know, you're sort of skipping around, but then you remember. And the fun thing about these movies, I'm always a sucker for both continuity and lack thereof, like in the Friday the 13th movies, where it's like, okay, great, they carried forward these things from the one before it, but like completely ignored this aspect or like literally reversed this aspect or whatever.
Right.
And like the actors are all over the place. Like you'll have the same actor playing like 3 different parts in the first 3 of this, like... So, but all that's part of the charm,
Yeah.
They kind of are made in an era when people weren't thinking of that they were going to see these movies a second time in a way, unless they were, given a re-release. This is way
true.
before any kind of home video market. Great.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, there you have it. The
All
end.
right. And the beginning of How About a Summary? Because that's next on our docket.
All right. Okay, here we go. Let's see. It's like 4 or 5 years after the Wolfman movie. And these 2 dumbasses break into the Wolfman's tomb. What's his name? Larry Talbot. Larry?
Yep.
Yeah.
Lawrence or Larry, both are
That's right.
there.
So they break in there. They're like, oh, this guy was rich. Let's, grave robbers. And they open the tomb up or the casket, whatever, and he's covered in wolf's bane, and his body has not decayed at all. And they're like, oh, that's interesting. Whatever. Grab his ring anyway. And of course, their stupidity brings him. The moonlight hits him, and he comes back from. Well, he's not really even dead. I guess he can't die. But they revive him, and he kills them, and escapes. He gets out and he's on the loose. Of course, the coolest thing I think about Wolfman is that it really is sort of this Jekyll and Hyde thing, right? Like he kind of knows, to a degree, he knows who he is and what's going on, and it's tragic for him, right? Just like at the end of the last movie. It's super tragic, right? Like he gets killed by his own father, and his father then has to like realize that the monster that he killed was his son all along, right? That's terrifying and sad and all that. So I really like the character for all of that. But in this case, he's, he hits him. He gets hit on the noggin, and he wakes up himself, but kind of has a little amnesia action going on. And the doctors take him in, and the police question him and everything. So there's this whole thing about like he can't be Larry Talbot because Larry Talbot is dead, so he's just having this delusion. But then people start dying because he's escaping and becoming the Wolfman and killing people in town. And this sets him off on this journey of like, well, I've heard that there's a guy who was really good with science stuff. So let me go track him down. And that guy is Ludwig Frankenstein, and he goes to the town. He finds a gypsy. He goes
from
to
the original,
town.
his buddy Minerva.
Right, Minerva, of course.
Maleva.
Oh yeah, Maleva, not Minerva. Yeah, same difference. So they head to what's the name of the town again?
I forget.
Doesn't matter.
They go to Frankensteinville.
Frankenstein town.
Frankenstein City, yeah.
So they go there, and I think one of the cooler scenes, he gets to, they've obviously Frankenstein's castle is in ruins from being burnt to the ground, and he goes in search anyway because he wants Frankenstein's notes, and he falls into the ruins, like into the sub chambers of the ruins, and it's all iced over, and he comes upon Frankenstein's monster encased in ice, which is, I think, a really cool dichotomy to having presumably died in the fire. And he breaks him out because he's like, "Who's this, bro?" And then Frankenstein's monster kind of helps him find Frankenstein's notes, or tries to help him, but it's unsuccessful. And then they just kind of like go their separate ways. And Talbot he's continuing his search. He finds Frankenstein's daughter, tries to get her to give him the note.
A
the notes.
Frankenstein's daughter. It's unclear. It could be the original Frankenstein's
that's true. Yeah, I
daughter.
kind of just assumed it was a daughter, but you're right. There's sort of this vagary about like time.
Yeah, because it's in Son of Frankenstein, it's about Frankenstein's son, and that came 2 films before this.
Okay, that's fair.
Before this was Ghost, so we don't know. She is either Frankenstein's, the original Frankenstein's daughter or granddaughter.
Yeah, I guess that's true because it in the Wikipedia it calls her a descendant. Her name's Elsa.
Elsa.
Okay, so that's fair. Yeah, it's somebody. It's a Frankenstein. And she's first like, get out of here. And then the doctor who originally treated Larry has tracked him down, and they kind of they coalesce, and they're like, "Hey, let's figure this out. Maybe we can help you, and maybe we can rid this town of Frankenstein's monster who's tromping around and generally just being Frankenstein-y, monstery, interrupting parties and such." And then the town, of course, is like, "Screw these guys. We hate everybody. Let's just blow up the dam and flood the castle and kill everybody." I mean, meaning the Frankensteins and the Wolfmans and the et cetera, et cetera. And so they basically do that, and the doctor gets a little obsessive. He's really fascinated with Frankenstein's monster, and they set up this experiment to sort of, how would you put it? He's like wants to drain the curse from Larry of the Wolfman through the electrical something and bubble and brew and whatever. It's
right.
very
Larry's convinced, since he can't die of normal means, he has to have like the life sucked out of him. So
right.
That's basically then what this doctor's trying to help both him by killing him through sucking the life out of him, as well as put an end to Frankenstein's monster finally by doing the same to him. But then I guess he decides to do the opposite of that by, instead of doing that to the monster, like he decides to juice up the monster.
Right. And of course, the monster gets loose, and then Larry turns into the Wolfman, and he gets loose, and then they have a real punch 'em up while the place is flooding, but then the place floods, and that's the end. And
that is the end. Like these movies do. They just end. Like, great, place is flooded. Right. Great, castle's gone, flooded. The end comes up. Like, that's it. Forget about our other characters. Not important. No denouement.
Yeah, there's no denouement, so to speak.
Right. It's like you came to see the monsters fight, and now they got flooded, so it's over. Bye.
They're like, we'll give you 72 minutes, no more, no less.
Yeah, which I appreciate. Great. All right, Tim, fine telling. I'm sure we'll paint even a better picture, or more of a picture, I should say, as we get into our next section here and further sections. So you ready for that?
Oh, yeah.
Here we go. What worked?
What worked? What worked for you? What worked for you? What worked for you?
It worked like a charm, Smith.
What worked? What worked for you?
I mean, this movie was off to the races for me, Tim. With the opening scene, classic like graveyard, Universal monsters horror film graveyard, with like
Hell
a
yeah.
panning shot. So it's not just like our limited scope. It's just like we're in it with these two. And they're grave robbers. They're straight up grave robbers. It's so good. So just everything about that mood, that set piece, that they're grave robbers, like check, 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 check. But then even what I think is so much fun, it's kind of like, again, comparing to other, our slasher films that have gone on for movies and movies, like how does Jason get revived each time? It's just so much fun. Like even it's something that you might kind of forget about or whatever, it's a detail that I love. And this one I just thought was so smart. Like it's not just because it's simple, but it just seems like such a sort of like logical what if. Like, okay, they kind of made a point in the last one that he's buried with his ring or whatever. So if we know that becomes part of the lore. So, okay, yeah, you'd imagine in this time, there are grave robbers. They'd probably get wind of that and be like, let's steal his jewelry. It all clicked and made sense. So for just those fun, inciting incident story reasons, as well as just the everything else you want from one of these movies, started off with a bang for me. And pretty soon after that, he's turning into a Wolfman already. It was great.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. It is a smart setup. It's got that kind of like, oh, we know what's coming. It's always fun to watch the clueless, grave robbers in this case, bumble their way into, hell, essentially. Just screwing it up for everybody.
Yeah, get killed, boom, bada boom.
Yeah, that all I liked quite a lot. I also was kind of surprised at how intense Lon Chaney Jr. is.
Dude, let's talk about him next, because you bet I've got stuff.
Like to me, that was kind of the thing that jumped out. It's like right away, he is just a 1,000,000,000% going full bore.
Well, it's talking about continuation from the last one, where his was sort of that acceptance of, like you said, the Jekyll Hyde thing. I contain this evil, therefore he just, accepts not wanting to exist.
Yeah.
So that was just so smart to have him, his thrust, it's so clear, and he plays it so well just from the get-go of like his motivation is to re-die, is to die with even more finality than he did last time. But then kind of, so like that's fun in the story sense that's his motivation. We got it. That's what he's working on. But then like what you're saying, the way he performs that, it's just like, he's carrying that weight of what his repercussions are, of he's at risk of killing anyone. And he's as suitably stressed as one should be in that. And it feels like he's just sort of sweating and intense the whole time. And he just does that so well. I love it.
Man, I love his outbursts. They're so good. Like the fight when the orderlies try to like calm him down and everything. It's so good. He's got a cinder block for a head. I mean, man, that guy's head is huge. It's crazy. No wonder that like he had been the monster previously.
Right.
But yeah, he's really going for it. And I think that carries most of the movie for me. I
mean, not just his performance itself, but the type he is. He's actually like kind of a head scratcher of a lead, like when you think of for the Wolfman. He's not like Lon Chaney Jr. He's not the typical leading man type. Like, we have the other doctor characters who are like the more like the handsome ones, the ones who are like set up as the clear romance with the woman that always happens. He's got this like really affable kind of everyman quality to him that's kind of like coupled with his just he does have a kind of like large weight and demeanor, but like that friendly giant kind of like archetype. I don't know, just that kind of like the person you want to root for who's like super empathetic in a way. Might be prone to outbursts also because he cares so much. He cares so much.
He's very like a big old like aw shucks guy.
Yeah,
but he's not
exactly
doing that thing.
But he's just that person though, So just him being his casting, it's just a neat choice but works so well with someone who's the reluctant murderer, you could say.
The reluctant murderer.
Someone who seems like he wouldn't want to. Yeah, someone who seems like he wouldn't want to hurt anyone, who's only empathetic and aw shucks, but like is going to only kill people when the full moon gets him. So just both interesting and fun and appropriate casting on his part. And as you said, his performance is great.
Yeah, agreed.
Cool.
Tortured.
Yes, very tortured. And I mean, just kind of like round out our cast here. I love how it ends up like our hodgepodge team of heroes that we kind of get together by the end. Like we got Larry working with the Frankenstein, played by Bela Lugosi. Then we have Frankenstein's daughter or granddaughter. Then we have the gypsy woman, Mileva. And then we got the doctor guy and like maybe that mayor character, who's in all these movies. That actor. It's just like a fun, like little, like we gotta save the day troop that they assemble by then. A ragtag troop. I was just getting such a kick out of all of them together. It was fun.
Agreed.
Well, should I just keep going here?
Yeah, you should.
Okay. Also, just like about promise of the premise, kind of almost fan service feeling stuff, but that you forget you're going to get in these movies is just when like the worlds themselves cross over is so much fun. Cause like we have the Wolfman world that's like God, what would you say? Like the more like London set with the gypsies on the outskirt, kind of like those kind of police officers. It's all got a certain feel, the graveyards right there, the sort of like cobblestone streets, like all that. Maybe those specifics carry forth too. But then the Frankenstein world is the more like Germanic. I don't know. It's just got different tactileness and different just the setting, I guess. So to have those worlds meet of when Larry and Mileva travel together to Frankensteinville, it's just like this great combining of worlds to have them in this town talking to people who we know are just clear Frankenstein town people. It's getting such a fun kick out of that. Okay, well, you're just staying quiet, so you want me to keep going? All that I loved, okay. I guess other overall things, God, how it's shot, Tim, it's just like, I was so in love with not just like, we talked about the setting, and but the overall look, whether it's the sort of deep shadow play that's happening, the moving camera where it's like, got like where you have the first time, or I guess the second time, but the time at the beginning when he's in the hospital and the moonlight comes in and reaches him, it's like the camera creeps with this sort of flowy lighting of the moonlight on the ground till it reaches him. Or we have like when we transition it's once they've gotten to the town and he's like kills that first woman as the Wolfman. And then we like cut to the town and it's this shot like a close-up of a light on a lamp post. And it feels like it could just be a shot that's like an establishing shot, then we cut to something else. But it's so cool. It like tells this story. We're on the lamp post, we see the street, the lights turn on, then all of a sudden next to it versus cutting away. And then the camera does like a jib down, and all of a sudden we're with the townspeople walking up, carrying the woman. It's just really cool. It's a lot of fun, like moving tracking shots in this. And then just on the inverse side, so many cool, more still shots of just kind of like what we were talking about in the 31 Jekyll and Hyde. But I'd say even more so with this, of just really neat like framings using both like the objects in the space, as well as then the shadows being cast by those objects or people. Just really, really fun framing things going on in this that just kept me like, just engaged throughout. Even if it wasn't like the sort of highlights of the beginning, middle, and end, which I say are the clear highlights. I don't know whether it was just how it was shot or he turns into Wolfman plenty of times. That was always, that was always something going on. But yeah, kind of like as I said, I think the beginning, middle, end, or the strongest, just sort of like the linchpins for our films. You know, I was geeking out about the grave robber scene, just our start to the film. And then we have this centerpiece. You know, I loved it, Tim. And it's now you know what I'm talking about. Like when I said in Night of the Demons, I said, what is it whenever there's one of these scenes in a movie, Tim? I'm going to love it. And you were like trying to guess it. Do you remember what it is now?
People dancing.
Yep, a song and dance scene, Tim. So, oh my God, tra-la-la-la-fa-la-la, whatever it was. I was just having so much fun with that scene. Not just for the sake of the song and dance number of it itself and the whole town putting it on, but in the context of this film and a horror movie, it just sort of works like, you know, in that same classic way they say it's important to have humor in horror films because then they'll, you know, blah, 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 makes the scary parts, blah, 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 builds the tension. It was exactly that, where like underneath this joy and celebration, much like Larry Talbot's going through, you just know something's going to happen. Like this is just like, this is our high before things are going to really take a turn. So like you're getting caught up in watching it, but then you know that's it's gonna break or something. And how it did it, I was just so happy because I thought, you know, they could have just, that was the scene and they cut away and then things start to go dark. But just to have that scene filled with townspeople where the Frankenstein monster literally shows up then and there doing his thing for all the townspeople to freak out over. I mean, my God, just talk about like, getting exactly what you want from these movies, from that scene. I was just so happy that, yes, if you're going to have this big old party dance tra-la-la scene, that's when I want the monster to show up.
Yeah, I like there's like 4 or 5 women who are dancing who sort of are like la-di-dying through, and they like pass the Frankenstein's monster, and as they're dancing, they're all like, oh no. And they like just carry on, like pass them, like, oh, look out.
Someone then goes, really then they freak out.
Yeah.
And then their little escape together is so good on the carriage, and the monsters in the back with the barrels falling down, like it's kind of holding on
I love
awkwardly.
That. Yeah.
Their big escape.
Cracked me up.
Getting chased after by the townspeople. So that was the big centerpiece scene for me. I loved.
I really do like this weird, almost buddy comedy vibe that you get from the two of them.
Well, yeah, because honestly, it lives more up to like the Frankenstein. It lives more up to the meats. Like it's not called Frankenstein versus the Wolfman. It's meats. So it really, the majority of the movie, and this is taking the stretch too, if you're just sort of just calling the monster Frankenstein, but just taking the word meats from it. Yeah, they're like just hanging out during the movie, and it's
a meat cute.
Yeah, it is.
He's like, oh man, you've been in this ice for a while. Let me help you out, brother.
Well, yeah, that's what's that is kind of what you get. It is so funny, the scene, like Larry's motivation of what he's doing there in the town. As I said, it's so clear. He just wants to die, thinks the science can help him do that. But for actually like digging him out of the ice, you don't really have a beat of like, we don't like, why is he necessary? Why is he doing that? Like,
He's got a heart.
Right. I gather it's to save this who he doesn't know is a person, or he assumes is a person. But there's this something so funny about just like, you see this, what I would think looks like a normal person in ice, and just goes right for it, break him out. I just thought that was so fun.
He's totally unfazed by it too.
Yeah.
He's like, oh man, look at this. There's like maybe a person in that ice. Let me investigate. Oh, it is a person. Well, let me crack him out of here. Then he wakes up, and he's obviously not a person. Like, he's this weird sort of thing. And Larry just rolls with it. He's like, okay, you good, bro? Can you help me find some papers? That'd be really great. And then the monster does. Yeah. He's like, over there.
So
it's
like
pretty hilarious.
Right. Like, I love all that. We'll get
There's
to
a moment in that scene too, which cracked me up. They get to this section of the ruins, and there's like, it's kind of like a cabinet that's like under some rubble, and the monster like points to it and kind of opens it up, and the monster starts to try to pull things out of it, and Larry's like impatiently standing there, and he eventually just kind of like shoves the monster out of the way, and he's like, let me just get it, and he like grabs a chest and pulls it out.
Right.
It's so good.
I remember that. There's something we'll get to in Things of Note, just kind of greatly informs a lot around the monster's character and sort of how he's relating to everyone else. So we'll get to that. But for now, how it turned out in this version of the film, it's just fun. It's just fun. So speaking of the title being Meets the Wolfman, like, and to get into our big ending here, Tim, like at a certain point, the movie's going, and I'm like, you never know with these older films. Sometimes they just feel like they completely don't hit the promise of the premise you actually want, which is like, where's my verses? Like, I'm here. They better get to the verses part. And honestly, I was kind of like not knowing whether that was going to happen or not. It was getting pretty late in the movie. So that's where I was at, wondering if they were going to verses or not. And then just when they're both tied up, and we got the Wolfman Larry turning into his Wolfman, seeing that Elsa, that her name Elsa, is in danger from the monster. And as soon as, we see the Wolfman seeing that and trying to break out, I was the most vocal I think like I've ever been in a movie, and like I can't even remember of just I felt like I was you, Tim, when you get excited, where I was just like yes, and like started just like having to clap. I was so excited just when he's like tied up in there and starting to get out, and they like give you just enough tension where he doesn't get right out right away, but it gives us just enough time for the monster to like carry her up the set of staircase. So then that, and also this whole time I'm like what is their actual battle gonna be? Like, they're just gonna kind of like roar at each other, like what can they do? Like, how can they mine their traits here? But they made it was such I hate to use the word, but just such an epic showdown that started with, it was just the perfect start where we have the Wolfman run up the stairs and like grab onto him and pull him from behind back down the staircase. This is so cathartic and exciting. And then we're just off to the races. And quickly we see it becomes like they work with their traits really well, where we have the Wolfman's like the agile one, and then the monster's the brute strength one. So it's sort of like we see their strategies play out, where the Wolfman's kind of is like hanging back and like getting a height advantage, then jumping on to attack. And then the Frankenstein monster gets in a few swings. And I was just so excited the whole time. And then meanwhile, we know the townspeople try to blow up the dam that's right behind them. So it just makes it for like the scenario, like the literal set. It's just got everything going for it. I was just thought for like a big finale. I was so excited. I just thought it was so exciting. As just like my favorite moments in everything we watched was getting our versus moment between these two. I'm
that's fair.
Fairly excited.
Yeah, it was fun.
Well, clearly I was more things than you. And then just, there's other little things going on in this too that I thought were just, that helped me plug into it, I should say. Like, it's sort of become a running thing in these movies where it's like the townspeople. We talked about this in the Phantom of the Opera, I think, where it's like townspeople are the representative of use brute force, kill the monster, and how that usually like will tie into the themes at play, let's say. And that can be frustrating when it's not sort of done with a knowing perspective, where you're, as if the filmmakers are almost caught up of like, yeah, that's just what you do, and then something happens. But this, it got me engaged when they brought up that moment and had that moment of debate where you had some of the townspeople, the representative being like basically arguing for the brute force approach. And then we have the other guy, was it the doctor or the mayor? I forget. But basically straight up saying, no, we got to think things through. It's going to take more to kill him this time. We can see he clearly survived this last thing. Like, we got to use our brains this time around. Can't just go in with, I think he literally says, we can't just go in with brute force or something like that. So just that the movie was on that level of debate was able just to make me plug into it that much more. I really appreciated that.
Yeah. On a thematic level too, I thought it was cool that in a way they're kind of crossing over the themes of the characters, right? So, the Wolfman is a cursed monster, right? Like, he has gained this curse, and the people around him, they're fighting him over a thing that he has no control over, right? He's cursed. And in this, he actually sort of becomes more the victim of science and the experimentation on him. Whereas the monster, Frankenstein's monster, kind of becomes more representative of this curse thing where the town just is like, he's just a curse. We're cursed by him. The town is cursed by him. Get rid of him. And so you're kind of flip-flopping their thematic, whatever you call that, character, whatever, like problems. And I think that's really cool. And ultimately, you're kind of you're getting to this point where it's not they kind of are the problem, but they're not really the bigger problem.
Yeah.
And in spite of that, they still go after each other. Right? Like, they could just, like, they're pals. They could have just joined forces and, like, pieced out together.
Wait, who are you talking about?
The Wolfman and the Frankenstein's monster.
Okay. I lost
They could have.
Okay,
but they're at the mercy of they're at the mercy of everybody else in this movie in a lot of ways.
Right. Well, I mean, it's only at that, they are working together the whole time. It's only at that way ending when the monster's threatening Ilsa.
But that is a result of the combination of the town curse sort of mentality and the science stuff coalescing into this moment.
Yeah,
right. Like,
yeah.
That wouldn't have happened if everybody had minded their own business.
Mm-hmm.
But like, because you have kind of this combination of themes coming together all at once, and like external forces ultimately dictating what should happen with the two of them, it gums up the works and it doesn't go well. It causes more problems than solutions, and everybody kind of dies because of it. Well, not everybody, but the two of them presumably suffer the worst consequence through all of that. Had everybody just been like, let them be, yes, maybe the Wolfman would kill a couple more people. Maybe. Yeah. And maybe Frankenstein would like stomp on some stuff a little bit, Frankenstein's monster. But ultimately, they could have buddied up and just like gone off and hung out.
Right. I guess all I was saying was like, I get, because of like the immediacy of the situation of, he's threatening this woman. Like you get
Yeah.
why, and they're both monsters.
But why does Wolfman in that moment like suddenly care about her?
Well, that's his Larry part coming through.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's cool. I think, having this sort of the experiment and the draining and the whatever, all that fun stuff, it's almost like blurring the lines between their good and bad sides.
Yeah.
But again, that's Mannering is Dr. Mannering is the culprit in that case.
Mm-hmm.
It's him, he's Dr. Frankensteining it up and like being like obsessive and being like, oh, look at all this cool stuff that we can learn from. It's like, dude, calm down.
It's so funny. You talking about all this just makes me realize, which you could probably tell from the way I was talking about it, but like as soon as we were, they were tied up and we were about to break up into the fight scene, I just turned back into like a 6-year-old boy, and I didn't. That's all I was thinking about was them about to fight. Like
that's fair.
Everything you're saying, I was just not even.
But none of this is a
terms.
criticism. It is the movie. Like
I just say it's funny
cool.
how my mind wasn't even there to be thinking about these other things going on. Well, I mean, do you just sort of nod your head, but to a lesser extent with everything I just said, I guess? Do you have anything on your own that you want to share? I think that's kind of my list.
No, I mean, you're pretty much covering the stuff that I agree with pretty much everything you're saying. Man, I'm trying to think how, mostly, no, I'm good. I have all my other stuff really does fall into what didn't work for me.
So I'll take this section, you take the next section. Great. All right. So then let's do that. Move into our next section, the Tim section. What did not work?
It's not ready yet.
Seems to work okay.
No, something important's missing.
What did not work?
Well, I hate to say it, but I really dislike Bela Lugosi as the monster.
Oh, poor Bela. Poor Bela.
It's just not his cast. Like, he's such a different persona. I was like, I just felt like it was a huge miss. For so many ways. For one, man, Bela should have been the doctor. Although I get that, like, just as a person, he has his sort of limitations, I guess, in terms of, he struggled with his accent and stuff like that. And I get it if they're like, man, we don't want, that going on, whatever. But I just felt like he doesn't look right as the monster.
Well, they should have just had Igor be in it again and bring him back for the third, fourth time or whatever.
Yeah, that would have been great.
Yeah,
I would have loved to have Igor, mucking up the works even more in there.
Yeah,
So
but they were
that
trying
really bummed me out. It didn't work for me.
Right, but it's funny how they were like, dealing with the continuity of the last one, where Igor gets put inside the Frankenstein monster.
Oh my God. I mean, I don't even remember. I don't even know if I've ever seen that one.
Just watch through all of them. I think you'll get a kick out of it.
So, oh boy, that's interesting. It was virtually impossible for me to get past that. And
I was just kind of like, I certainly didn't mention Bela Lugosi's performance in the what worked section. So for whatever that's worth, but I certainly am not either going to mention it in what did not work. It just kind of was. I feel like the monster in this movie really was limited to, and I guess for me, sure they could have done more way, but we'll get into that with what, in things of note. but it was sort of like almost this generic Frankenstein monster. Like almost, it felt like to me like anybody could have played him was the portrayal kind of thing. And it was just kind of like he did it and did fine. And it seemed like, accurate. So just kind of, didn't not work, but I could see where you're coming from as far as just like it wasn't being milked as much. It did not bother me during it, but now especially like knowing kind of why that all was, which I'll get to in things of note, I just forgive it that much more. So whatever.
Well,
But
and I think
see
this
you.
this sort of leads me to what I was touching on at the top of. It immediately makes me then start comparing it to Boris Karloff and then being like, why isn't this as good as the original movie? You know what I mean? Like I get down the rabbit hole really fast and then I'm like thinking the same thing about, even though I like Lon Chaney Jr.'s performance in this, I'm still kind of being like, yeah, but it's not as good or it's not the same. And then once my brain started going there, I was having a really hard time just appreciating the movie for what it was. And that's on me, right? Like, that's not really fair to this movie, but that's just where my brain went.
It's so funny because, like, I think we really were coming at this movie from totally different angles where you're just looking at it as like a standalone movie. Just put on and watch Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. This was literally like next in my chronology of my watch through of all these movies that I've been doing. And I've just been holding off watching it because I think I knew it was, in our hat. So
that
when
makes sense.
You have Bela playing the Frankenstein monster, it's this kind of, for me, it's this kind of more this like, oh, yep, this is the one where he does, like, this is his turn. This is just where he does it because they're always changing. It's all over the place. And when you're watching in that context, it's kind of like I said up front, that's almost part of the weird charm of it all. It's like, this is the one where it's just like, weirdly, the monster looks like Bela Lugosi.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I mean, I don't have much to say about this not working for me, but again, coming from this sort of point of view, there was a little bit of this, we're just doing like the redo greatest hits of the better versions of these movies. And I'm like, I was in middle, like there were, I'm not saying that that's actually true, but I kept having this like, I guess trepidation about it. I was like, oh God, like where are we going with this?
It's funny because for me, it felt like the sort of retread that you want from the fifth Frankenstein movie, where it's like, sure, the continuity is over the place with the castle and where it is and what happens to it and wasn't it destroyed way, way more kind of thing. But in those moments of them like sweeping the dust and the rubble off the old equipment, like that's the kind of fun thing that you want from the fifth movie, where rather in the context of being a retread, it's like, uncovering the past and sort of feeling that connection to the first one in this new context. So that was what I was getting from watching it.
Well, maybe part of the issue for me is that like it was so unclear like where and when we are in the world, like. And that would obviously be helped if I had watched all the other ones beforehand. But even the vagueness of like, what time period are we in? Right? Like, Larry Talbot seems almost too modern of a dude.
Right. Well, you know what? Just to jump ahead to things of note, because it's directly tied to this, what you're saying now, the times that the originals take place in are completely different. So they just kind of shrugged, the filmmakers knew that and just kind of shrugged their shoulders, being like, well, it is what it is. Let's hope kind of no one cares or notices. And largely audiences did not care or notice.
But they say, don't they say you died 4 years ago or whatever it was?
Well, no, as far as like the actual like periods in history they take place, like the Wolfman versus Frankenstein, like different eras. So that's what they were just like, well, whatever.
So here's my other confusion then, because I have I want to know those details, and when they're like brushing past them like pretty loosey goosey, I was like, wait a minute.
That again,
why
that's part. Yeah,
is Larry Talbot not British?
Well, that's see, those are like you gotta look at it like the context of like these are the original the Friday the 13th, where like that
Right.
continuity where you're trying to follow it, but then by the fourth one you're already like, wait, wouldn't it be like 2010 right now and it's like 1991? Like, you know, and you just start to like, but that's what's so much fun. I don't know, just that again is just part of what's so much fun about them for me. I keep saying that.
Yeah. I think having the context of the other films helps you get into that, but like just jumping in, whatever.
Yeah.
Without what's a good expression? I'm jumping in nude.
Well, Tim, you know I maybe we're getting into October here, so maybe you'll look at it as an excuse. You could watch them all through.
I could do that.
And then when you get to this one, you could skip it or watch it and fast forward or watch it all over again with a totally new perspective.
It does make me think. I know Universal sort of attempted to knock on the door of creating a new, Universal Monsters like shared universe.
I watched the Wolfman, but not the Dracula, the Dracula one with Tom Cruise. I've watched the Benicio del Toro Wolfman. That's it.
The Mummy one is Tom Cruise.
Sorry, that's what I meant.
It's confusing. They didn't do a great job.
There is no Dracula one. It's just the Mummy
it up.
and the Wolfman are the only like reboot attempts they did.
I guess. Either way, it makes me. I like the idea. After watching this, I was like, yeah. How would you if you wanted to redo that whole world and include everybody in it? Where, like, how do you do that? What does that look like?
That. I mean, that I feel like is a thing of note if you want to get to that section.
Yeah, sure. Let's get into it because I don't have anything else.
Great. All right, here we go. Things of note.
Things of note.
This should be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that is such a fun head scratcher. Just a prompt. How would you like reboot the Universal horror monster movies? Even though it's not the Universal movies, but it sounds like Robert Eggers is still going to do his Nosferatu movie.
I think that's happening.
I think is going to be sort of telling as far as the possibilities of what you can do with making a modern film that's still set in this like OG time, Well,
that to me is the big question.
Yeah.
If you're going to make a big shared universe, how do you overlap these characters in terms of era? Like, I think it would be silly to make today or tomorrow, right? Like that it all takes place in the present.
So just to clarify, you're sort of skipping ahead a question. Not only just how do you reboot any of these movies, but how do you reboot them with the intent of eventually tying them together?
Correct. Because I think that idea is really exciting. The idea of a shared monster universe. Like,
I feel like you just call it, you set it in 1890 and just call it a day. All of them take place in the 1890s, whatever. You figure it out.
I guess you can probably get away with that, right?
Yeah. something in that era, circa early 1900s, late 1800s.
I mean, could you find some sort of main character through line? Like, is there something that connects all of the monsters? The characters, like,
well,
what are the characters? We kind of listed them off. Are we missing any? It's the Mummy, Frankenstein's monster, Dracula.
The only one we didn't mention was
Phantom
of the Opera. I think kind of counts. I mean,
okay, Phantom of the Opera, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Here, like I have
Invisible Man.
I have the full-on
Wolfman.
box set. I have the full-on box set right here.
That's 8.
Yeah, they even throw in. Yeah, they have Phantom of the Opera on here, and then they even throw in the Bride of Frankenstein, who's just they don't actually get married, but that's her name. Even though she only appears at the way end of Bride of Frankenstein, she's on the cover there and has become iconic. So yeah.
Well, remember that
with her,
that
there's
movie
8.
that did not work at all, called The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Yeah.
I mean, it was based on a
so
comic
excited
book, so
for
like,
it. It sounded
take that for
so
what it's
cool.
worth.
It looked so cool. I talk about
Yeah.
early letdowns in my teenage years.
But yeah, I don't know. I'm fascinated by this idea, but I do not have an answer like in any way. I'm like, I don't know how you make it cool.
I feel like how they did it in this one does work. Like again, that was exciting. Even if the timelines are totally off, whatever, it could have been like where he's buried for 30 years or, whatever, instead of the 40. I don't know. Timeline aside, the sort of the physical location is what, I don't know, that works, where it feels like you're going, like how exciting to hear. And I was really excited in that one. Oh, in this world, they are aware of this Dr. Frankenstein who sort of looks at things, has an unconventional approach to things. And that just sort of is already building the anticipation. They go to his town. So just something like that was great. I don't know. I mean, you could do it. I don't know. You could do it tons of ways. That's why I think I'm just more fixed on the whole, like, how do you also just reboot them at all? But
I feel like it's kind of been done in various ways on like the small screen too.
Yeah, you watched the Netflix Dracula, I remember. I still haven't watched that. I really
liked that, actually.
But you recommended it, yeah.
Yeah.
And then we had, I mean, it's old now standards, but as far as in our lifetime goes, it doesn't feel like Bram Stoker's Dracula, meaning the Francis Ford Coppola movie. It feels like it's modern, in a way, compared to these old ones. Yeah.
I mean, maybe it'd be cool. I feel like this has kind of been done, sort of, if you take a character like Van Helsing or the descendant of Van Helsing. I know there's a TV show about like his great granddaughter or something like that. Or something in that realm where the myths of these stories is kind of taken at face value, but somebody decides to go like dig up the truth of like that spurred these ideas, that spurred these myths on. And in doing so, they find like they're looking for totems or something that represent these things, so like the scarab of Ra for the mummy, and Dracula's actual castle or whatever.
Right.
Like they go through these places, and so it becomes this sort of like journey through different realms or worlds in modern day.
Aren't you just kind of describing the Monster Squad?
Kind of.
I'm pretty sure
but
that's
they unleash them, right?
Right. But also what you're talking about, I'm just still trying to I thought you were talking about something different. Because now it sounds like you're pitching a just sort of, how do you from the get-go do a revival that includes all these monsters? But I thought we were talking kind of like, I was more talking about like that question of how do you completely reboot these movies and sort of do the Marvel thing where they all get their own standalone movie and then
maybe
like,
that's a better idea. I think the trick is that like you can't. I think the failure of the Mummy movie with Tom Cruise.
I do not want to ever see it, so enlighten me.
It just. I mean, they're just trying to do this sort of like superhero epic scale world's going to be destroyed by this entity thing, and it's like we just met. You know what I mean? Like we can't jump to world-ending event in the first movie. And so I think you're right. I almost, maybe I'd totally retract my whole concept previously that you just do each individual's origin story and you find threads to tie them together to like lead you to the next movie. And then you get to a point where it's like, okay, now we've established where everybody came from.
And
how do they tie in together?
And this is kind of like a larger, I don't know, sort of filmmaking discussion, but what I'm interested in. But it's sort of the question of like how specific into itself do you make that movie, and how much, when you're making a movie, how much are you planning, how much context are you giving to it that you will be making another one down the line? So like, so kind of as an example, like we know we were getting 3 new Halloween movies with this reboot from the get-go. that's like, it kind of makes you go like, well, then it kind of takes it away. We know there are going to be 3 of them, but it's a slasher movie. We know he can always come back. So it's kind of forgivable for this one. But then now the same company announced they're rebooting The Exorcist with Ellen Burstyn, or, it's sequelizing it, just like they did with Halloween, getting Ellen Burstyn in on it to do like a sequel years later reboot, or years later sequel reboot kind of thing. But then they're also saying they want to do 3 more. And so that's an example for me. It's like Exorcist isn't a slasher movie. Like, it's all about the big exorcism at the end. So it's like, what, we're just going to have progressively bigger exorcisms each time?
Right.
Like, I don't know. It just sounds... And even if that was your plan, I feel like keep it private, it just sort of messes with your expectations. And then, so there's that, just the sort of like, or like what they did with the Ghostbusters reboot. Sorry to bring it up, but it's like, that's just a good example of a movie that was made where they lowered the stakes because they knew they were, or, quote unquote, knew they'd be making another one afterwards kind of thing. I don't know. So there's that whole angle, but then there's the whole like creative look at it too. Like if you rebooted Frankenstein, Wolfman, Creature of the Black Lagoon, Mummy, you presume like how sort of like maybe differentiating filmmakers and approaches do you take towards them, and how much overlap do you have with them? Like maybe the continuity is they're all set generally around the same period, so the potential for tying them together is there. But like, I don't know, how much flavor do you give each one? And just not being so fixed on like maybe getting ahead of yourself with the plans for how to combine them, but just like, I don't know, setting that intent. So then you just sort of in good faith are always trying to make the best movie at any given step versus like trying to like do this big map. And I don't mean to be dissing on the Marvel movies here, but they are probably applicable to this conversation. Anyway, that was a big ramble, but it's all just super interesting. Just the thought of like, setting out to do something where you are presuming there's going to be more, yet still wanting to make each one unique and the best thing it can be along the way, yet also making sure they're going to connect. I don't know. Any thoughts on all that?
Well, I mean, let's be honest. So the Marvel movies had built-in interconnectivity source material for 65 years worth of probably more. So I think the danger and maybe the pitfall of all of this is that you can't do that with properties that didn't already have that interconnectivity.
Well, let's say like you had, right. But
you're square pegging it, right?
But for sequelizing, you did have some source material, like the Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein are both pulling material from the original Frankenstein novel. So it's interesting how they are able to both have that continuity within itself. But as far as the overlap, that is totally different from the Marvel movies. You'd wonder if they kind of like are viewing, you'd have to sort of view all these that did cross over as like a sort of pseudo canon. I don't know. It'd be interesting. Yeah.
I mean, I just looked it up and like there's lots of articles and whatever about this, but Universal was calling it the Dark Universe. And I forgot about this. The first installment of what they thought was going to be the sort of shared universe of the Dark Universe was 2014's Dracula Untold, which I did not see.
Oh, so there was a third one. I just thought it was Wolfman and Mummy. Yeah.
There's more than 3. It was Dracula Untold, and then in 2017, The Mummy, the one with Tom Cruise. And then after that, a bunch of internal stuff happened. So they didn't really know what was going on. But then The Invisible Man that came out in whatever that was, 2020, I think.
Okay, the new one.
That was supposed to be part of the Dark Universe as well.
Okay, not Hollow Man. I was thinking of Kevin Bacon.
Hollow Man. I rewatched
I liked the new. I liked the new Invisible Man a lot.
I was lukewarm on it. It had some cool ideas. And so it doesn't include the Benicio del Toro Wolfman from
maybe
whenever
that was
from.
Even earlier.
Yeah.
I thought no, because I saw some like promotional image that was like Benicio del Toro like next to Tom Cruise, like something like that.
In the Mummy movie, they introduce Russell Crowe as Dr. Jekyll.
Funny. Right. And his pick, he was up there too. You know what? My big note here to these Hollywood heavyweights making these films, my first note is you don't make them out and out action movies. Like, dude, how about that?
Agreed.
As a starting point. Like, what
make
are you
them
doing?
horror movies. Come on, guys.
Which
what are
is
you doing?
Cool. That is cool. That is kind of what they landed on with the Invisible Man, I think. Sure, you had like your tussle scenes in it, but I think that comes with the territory with these. But that was, I think, more outright a horror film. Anyway, if that one had come first, things could have been differently. But wait, that's weird. Why I keep not thinking that. Okay, I could see it's part of their whole reboot, but if you're going to eventually tie them together, that one would be the odd man out because it's a modern day one. So that's why maybe it surprised me that was included in that discussion.
Right.
But anyway,
who knows?
Well, I feel like I could talk a lot on all this. It's interesting, but the my morbid curiosity killed the Ryan, Tim. I want to watch Dracula Untold now, just to be like, what the hell
I never watched it, so I kind of want to watch it too.
Sure, let's watch it, see how terrible it is.
I mean, I like that actor whose name is not
Luke
coming
Evans?
to me right now.
Luke Evans?
Yeah, Luke Evans. Yeah. He's in the Alienist series. I think that I recommended it at one point.
Alienist?
Alienist. Yeah, it's based on a book.
Okay. Well, I had
cool.
more on. Let's rewind to get back to Frankenstein meets the Wolfman here.
Okay.
Some things of note for this specifically. So originally, Tim, Frankenstein's monster, played by Bela Lugosi, had a voice, which was Bela Lugosi's voice. And he did everything from like sort of explaining some of the continuity that was there from the previous Frankenstein movie, Ghost of Frankenstein, including, we didn't even mention it, he's like walking around blind the whole movie. Like his eyes are closed and his arms are outstretched. And that's from going like something that happened in the last one. So the Bela Lugosi playing the monster, he speaks in this original cut and explains stuff like that. And maybe, even had that little discussion of that would kind of a little more support how he could get his help looking for the papers or whatever it was. But the audience reactions to it was apparently they laughed at his Hungarian accident. But this kind of like confounding thing about that, why that doesn't like, I don't know why it was maybe just maybe that's true, but the snap decision and it would have had to been a snap decision to just cut it because I don't know. It doesn't make sense when you actually think about it. Like that's Bela Lugosi's voice coming through Frankenstein is what happens at the end of Ghost of Frankenstein. Yet that wasn't an issue for audiences or the studio then, because it would have just been the continuation of that, where it's just, him as Igor. So this is technically actually Igor is in him, which I guess does kind of is funny. And now it's also casting him in his physical form, which wasn't the case for the last one. But even if you aren't taking that approach, couldn't you just dub it? Like with another voice, if it was really that egregious? They did it all the time. They still do it. I don't know.
That's interesting.
So some other things, actually, that was pointed out as a great kind of refresher on these films. I highly recommend James Ralph from Cinemassacre. He's like over the last 10 years will have his thing called Monster Madness. And I think he's eventually covered all of these old Universal films. And his summaries are just these really fun, on point, like just little 5-minute summaries of each film. Keeps track of the continuity and lack thereof. So that he helped me. He pointed that out. But there's some other fun things he mentioned. So this is the one where we see Frankenstein, his arms are outstretched because he's blind, which is kind of like the stereotypical way like people imitate Frankenstein.
Yeah.
So that's specifically from this film, that idea of Frankenstein doing that. But that means that when people are imitating both Frankenstein and Dracula, they're imitating both Bela Lugosi versions of those characters.
Right,
so when people imitate Dracula, they're imitating Bela Lugosi as Dracula, and when people imitate Frankenstein's monster, they're imitating Bela Lugosi as Frankenstein's monster. It's funny.
Weird.
Yeah. But there was also like I think it was not just his voice, but like the dialogue itself, like James Ralph dug up in the script somehow, was like kind of confusing. It was like both Igor and the monster's character was coming through the dialogue. And I think how that ended up in the end result ended up being a little confusing. So that maybe helps clarify a little more why they did cut it.
Got it.
A thing of note for our dismembering horror, expanded universe here, our connected universe. I think now Bela Lugosi is tied with Sam Neill for each having 3 movies we've covered of theirs. So we have The Black Cat, The Body Snatcher, and this for Bela Lugosi. And then we've talked about our 3 Sam Neill movies too. So I think there are 2 leads in most featured actors in our show. So it's fun keeping track of that. Dwight Fry, who is a staple for these Universal films, he does appear in this one in a bit part, but he was Renfield in the original Dracula and Fritz in the original Frankenstein, and he just has like a bit part as kind of like one of the townspeople, I think, in this.
Okay, cool.
But that's just kind of fun. But thing of note, on top of that, sadly, he died of a heart attack at the age of 44. That was just like a few months. This was his last movie. It was just a few months after shooting this movie, I believe. Maybe he had a couple more things in the can, but yeah, it was shortly after this movie he passed away. And and you can go see his plot at Glendale's Forest Lawn Memorial Park Cemetery, which is right by the Warner Brothers lot. If you haven't been, it's worth a trip. Tom Bosley is buried there. Anyway, I went long ago with a friend who is an expert in all these cemeteries. It was fun. Great. And then the casting being all over the place of these films, just like a little bit on that, just to make everyone more confused. So Lon Chaney Jr. plays Wolfman in this and the original Wolfman, but he also plays Frankenstein's monster in the Frankenstein sequels. And then we have Bela Lugosi, who we've already said plays Igor in the Frankenstein sequels, but then also, forget the original 2, who then also now in this one plays Frankenstein. And then, yet also that it's fun, in the original Wolfman with Lon Chaney as the Wolfman, Bela Lugosi is also in that playing the original werewolf that gives the werewolfism to Larry.
Oh,
he's like
really?
the gypsy looking Bela Lugosi guy.
Wow,
And then
that is so confusing.
But then once you get to like the supporting players, it only gets more confusing. So we'll just kind of leave it as that. Like Lionel Atwell, who's the mayor in this, plays like, is it like the constable guy in the earlier Frankenstein movie with like the wooden arm, and then he played someone else in another Frankenstein movie. So it's just like,
Jeez.
But they kind of made these movies assuming like you weren't gonna have necessarily seen them all, or that you never would see them again. So I don't know, just kind of different time, different place. The last little thing I had down was less something on this film, but just want to point out I get excited whenever they use the word lycanthropy in these movies, which is an actual dictionary word, which is like someone who thinks they're a wolf, like as a condition or whatever.
Right.
Basically, like thinks you have werewolfism. And I just remember, I told you werewolves were my favorite monster as a kid. And when I learned about this word lycanthropy, like in the 3rd grade or whatever, it was my favorite word. I'd try to always make it my Scrabble word. If you had to pick a random word for like a word game, I was always picking lycanthropy. So I one time told my aunt that I had lycanthropy and like had her going still to this day. It's because she's gullible. So I just have a close relationship and affinity with the word lycanthropy, and it's made me really happy for it to be in this movie.
Well, I'll tell you what, with them mutton chops you got rolling on your face right now and your long hair, all you need is a couple fangs Maybe paint your nose a little darker.
Great.
You got it going on.
I'll convince you yet. I'll convince
Open
me yet.
that shirt up.
Yeah.
Let that chest hair flow.
I can too. Great. Well, Halloween's coming up, so noted. And that is the funny thing, though. The flat-faced wolfmen are never my favorite. Anyways.
So I have a question to posit to you that you don't need to answer, but I think it's something interesting to think about. Do the Universal monsters require that they take place in this sort of medieval or post-medieval Gothic realm, era specifically? Or can you take the essence of their stories and put them in any time?
I guess I look at it as a matter of taste, because I think you can capture their essences and put them into modern time. It's in that's actually part of the fun. It could be like a modern day person going to Dracula's castle and, being in that context, and it's a new angle on it. But that for me is the down the line angle. That's the Monster Squad in the 80s, way after these films. Like taste wise, I so heavily associate the era and the setting with just what I want from these movies. Graveyards don't look like that anymore. Streets don't look like that anymore. People don't wear those clothes anymore. People have cell phones now. Like all that. Like yeah, maybe that I'm just sort of looking at how you're posing it kind of is, I can only think of it in reboot terms like we are already talking about. So as maybe that way to put it, if they were going to reboot them, I would want them to be in the old-timey time versus modern era. How about you?
Okay, that's fair. I agree. I think it's a matter of taste. I think part of what I think is fascinating is these stories, these characters are so a part of the sort of the greater like horror, just what's the word, collective understanding. Like they've surpassed, like everybody knows who each of them are just inherently or implicitly, I guess is the word.
God, it's
so.
Sorry, I just got to say, like, real quick, as soon as you say, hold that thought, but like, now I'm just flipping at how exciting it would be to set them in the modern era. So, like, I really don't know. I could get on board with both. Please continue.
Well, so my feeling is kind of a mixture of the two realities, like this association we have with the Gothicness of all of this. And the era, whatever, that they all kind of live in. If you're going to do the specifics, like calling them by their names, characters, I think I side kind of with you. You wanna lean into the source material of where they came from,
right? Like that is Dracula. It's not just a vampire.
But to tell the story of Frankenstein or the story of Dracula and the characters within, or the story of the Invisible Man, et cetera, I think is, no pun intended, universal enough that you could actually retell those stories in modern day just as the essence of what happens, and use the modern sort of world to support the essence of those stories, of what those characters are going through, but not have them be literally Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster.
For me, it becomes like a question of like story versus technology. Like how, like in this the story sense, think about how fun it would be in a modern mummy movie to sort of have like, snidey archaeologists who are just like skeptic, blah, 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 with their iPads and cell phones, like getting up front with the mummy, Yet also though, the technology, what I mean by that is just the technology in filmmaking. Like look what we have nowadays as far as like imagine actual like money behind one of these movies recreating like a castle in its prime, or these sets, or these villages, or like actually good effects and all that, and being able to like do that with that new coat of paint, modern paint, and all that we can do now. That's also exciting. And again, like, it's sort of both worlds. Like, you think of, even it's more of it's an action adventure movie, the Brendan Fraser Mummy movie, but like that's a good example of a more modern Mummy movie with but that's set a while ago. So it's like you have the fun of just sort of like, you feel a bit more connected to that period when they're all like wearing the clothes they're wearing, and it's set when they're set. You know, it's, I don't know, and it's a certain kind of adventure that you could only do if it's that set in that time. Yeah, certain kind of escapism. So I don't know, man. I could always feel like I could argue it one way or the other.
I like the idea of distilling it down to really small stories that are, in essence, the same story, but live in their own total world, like singular world. So, like, you know, for example, just because I read a lot of comic books, you know, the Incredible Hulk is a new version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right? It's a total reimagining of that, but it is at its core distilled from that. And so I am curious to think about how you could distill each of these into their own kind of thing, like and put them in modern day worlds. Like, where should Frankenstein exist if you're doing a new Frankenstein story, right? Like, is it like the Gothic South? You know, like where would be appropriate for Dracula,
right?
But not
so
actually,
maybe,
you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how to parse this out, but
so it's kind of interesting what you're saying, and maybe this is a way to parse it, like. Because, you know, you say, how do you do it now? And I just think of all the modern Frankenstein movies we do have. I just recommended Frankenhooker, which is a great, as like a, you know, 1990 or whatever set one. Or, you know, this is so funny. We're doing another Frankenstein movie. It was just a few episodes ago. We did the Hammer Horror first Frankenstein movie, Curse of Frankenstein. So when you're talking about like distilling the spirit of something, I think it's interesting to sort of like, let's say the original Frankenstein movie has a spirit to it that's tied to the monster, all that stuff. Plug into that spirit where, you know, so that would not be a Frankenhooker movie, you know? But then how do you do it? Yeah, if you're going to set it modern day, like exactly like you said, you just kind of threw out there Gothic South. It's just sort of, I think, using that. Yeah, what am I trying to say? Like, it's a matter of you're plugging into the original film as a constraint, but then also using a constraint of being able to set it in modern time. I just think that's interesting. Yeah.
Here's another example of how this, what I'm kind of driving at. You know, West Side Story is Romeo and Juliet, right? They're the same story.
Yeah.
And specifically, like not accidentally, like West Side Story is a musical version of Romeo and Juliet, but it's set in New York City at a particular era. Like, they're changing enough of the sort of trappings of the story for another kind of effect to sort of speak to some other thing that also ties into the original, but is not the original. You know, like, there's something really fascinating about that idea of doing that. And, you know, it's been done, you know, for another example, let's say the TV show Sons of Anarchy is very much predicated on the same exact structure as Hamlet. But it's not Hamlet. I mean, it is Hamlet, but it's Hamlet on motorcycles in California in modern day, right? Like, so can you, and it has been done. I just can't think of any, you know, that come to mind exactly, but like, I guess Reanimator is essentially Frankenstein, right?
Yeah. On its sleeve, you know?
What?
I said on its sleeve, like you said with the other ones. It's not being shy or anything.
Yes, very much so. So there's something really interesting about this idea of like, what would your version of any of these be if you were going to do them? And I think that's really cool to like go down that rabbit hole. I've never really thought about it.
Here's another way maybe to parse it is like you go, what is the core like moral conflict at the heart that the monster and story represents? And then you go, where does that feel like it can be the most sort of powerful and prescient in a modern day setting? Like I think the Reanimator and Frankenhooker and even Frankenweenie are just sort of more like fun what ifs. But to do like a the Frankenstein movie, you know, a straight up just call it Frankenstein, you know, again, that's, I think you do have to think, well, how do you sort of go big or go home versus more just sort of looking at it as a what if, and go big and go home, what I mean, in relation to whatever that core sort of question or morality play that's at play.
Yeah. All right. Enough of that. I don't know. It's an interesting idea and thing to explore.
I wish we were just all the money in the world, Tim, or just had friends at Universal. It'd just be so fun to actually get to experience this playground. Maybe we're just like 50 years shy of just being able to like plug in our brains and make a movie appear or whatever, you know?
Yeah, right.
But I just, oh God, I just, it would be so much fun to figure this all out. Like I still think about when I'm like, you know, how much I love the Black Cat that we watched. And I still think about like, would you want to reboot this? How would you reboot this? I just, still think of that all. God, even thinking about like, how do you cast what are modern actors that somehow get at what you want from the, oh God, it's so cool. So interesting. But I guess we can fall back on too, just for right now, if it's kind of end on the note, how you originally posed the question here, even though we ended up circling back around to this whole reboot of, there is something just kind of cool about the original old-timey setting. So
cool, dude.
Anyway, that's all I got. Yeah, let's move on to some recommendations. Wind down here.
Well, I just looked and I have not recommended The Alienist, and I'm shocked. It's based on one of my favorite books called The Alienist by Caleb Carr.
Yeah, it didn't sound familiar. Yeah.
That blows my mind. It's a great, great book. Read the book. But they did, I think it was TNT maybe? I'd have to look it up. You can find it easily. But they did a series based on the first book, and I believe they did a second season based on the second book, which I have not watched yet. But the first, it's great. It's a great story. And it's based on, like, Caleb Carr was a historian in New York City, a New York City historian. And so it's got all this factual stuff about the era, and it takes place right at the end of the 19th century in New York. And it's about a serial killer, and it's super cool. And you should definitely watch it and or read the novel. Or both.
Cool. Never heard of it. Sounds interesting. Stuff I've been watching recently, I'd been wanting to revisit Moneyball. I'm sure you've seen that. It's a baseball movie. Not like me to seek out a baseball movie, Tim, but Bennett Miller, who made this film, he made Foxcatcher also. Yep. And I just think he's like, even though he's like in the 2010s, I think is only made the Capote, but he's only has those 3 movies he made. I feel he's like, I think just one of the most interesting, gifted filmmakers active right now, but only makes things at that sort of glacial Kubrick pace.
Interesting.
But anyway, if someone can get me into baseball like this movie did, I was so into it. I'm glad I revisited it. I think it's a great, great film. He's a great director. So check out Moneyball if you haven't.
Cool.
All right. Your turn to pull, Tim, for next week. What are we watching?
Here we go. I'm pulling right now. Kaboom, this one. It is called Horror Stories. It's from 2012, and it's South Korean.
Oh, great. This is actually, it's an anthology movie. South Korean horror anthology film. Maybe we'll get a good one amongst them. I'm always so skeptical.
Anthologies are interesting.
That's exactly what we're here for. We're here to dig through it all so you can ideally be with us. But if not, you don't have to. We're doing the dirty work for you. It's part of the fun, as I said. All right. Well, with that, you can find us wherever you found us. our big ask, if you made it this far and enjoyed being here, please let a friend know they should check out this podcast if they're a like-minded friend. Great. And well, in further closing then, whether you're Team Frankenstein or Team Wolfman, thanks for listening.
And we will see you next time.
Goodbye.